Iain was a senior academic in the Department of Art and Design for many years at UWE, where I was, and we both kind of ended up taking early retirement within a few months of each other. But Iain is still a practicing artist and researcher and academic. He's a member of Project Dialogue and has been since very early days of that team. And now works independently with a number of institutions and projects. And I think it's fair to say it's particular interest in ecological concerns, amongst many others. Simon's also a visual artist and a lecturer with an interest in the processes and dynamics of environmental change. Simon's work includes the collaborations relating to intertidal projects with communities, particularly on the Suffolk coast. For me, what links Iain and Simon, apart from the fact that they've known each other since Noah was a lad, is their joint emphasis on art-science collaboration and its need to be cognizant of its social engagement and education elements. And also that they both recognise the broad conceptual basis for research that is potentially arising from strong interdisciplinary academic and artistic networks, which is another aspect, I suppose, of what events like tonight are all about. So I'm going to hand over to Iain.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm a sort of lapsed academic in the sense that you can be a lapsed Catholic, in that I've kind of stopped believing, or almost stopped believing, in a lot of the academic enterprise. And one of the reasons for that is kind of what I'm going to talk about in a minute. But on a much more practical basis, I spent the last 15 years working with practice-led arts doctoral students. And one of the most important aspects of that role is helping them make sense of the broader context in which they're working. They know a great deal about their specialist subject. They usually have a highly developed practice. But what they often have difficulty with is trying to work out where does it fit into the bigger picture, how to make those kind of adjustments. So that's a kind of preamble to what I'm going to say. The other thing I must apologise, I'm not going to talk about my own work. I'm going to talk about other people's work, and because I'm going to talk about other people's work, I'm going to read this because I don't want to get it wrong, basically. Hallelujah. Okay. For some years now, our relationship to the notions of the autonomy of science and art has been changing. Owen Jones, a geographer and professor of environmental humanities, summarises this as follows. I know it's boring when people read the quotes that you can perfectly well read for yourself, but it helps me keep the time right. Philosophy is not separated from, and experimentations can operate in and between social science, natural science, poetry, art, politics, and literature. The epistemological, methodological divides which currently isolate these approaches are seen in the article from which this is taken as merely institutional and pedagogical. Now, we might want to quarrel with that, but it is indicative of a growing view. Earlier this year, the Associate Director of Research and Innovation at the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Centre gave this presentation. He spoke about institutional integration across disciplines and geographical scales, and about the use of innovative tools for climate risk management, including the design and facilitation of games and experimental performances to help learning and dialogue. What I want to suggest is that those two quotations are indicative of a shift that's marked, in my view, by three linked factors. An extradisciplinary, mycelial approach to collaborative work as a challenge to both disciplinary thinking as the basis of professional authority and the binary divide between scientific and artistic practices. The emergence of broad, multidimensional, thematically based fields of concern as the focus of genuinely cutting-edge inquiry. And three, and perhaps most controversial, a challenge to disinterested inquiry as a cornerstone of objective research in the light of concern with social impact, financial vested interest, and socially engaged practices. These three factors, as far as I'm concerned, inform four projects initiated by Christine Baeumler, Cathy Fitzgerald, Antony Lyons, and Perdita Phillips. Significantly, although they all work as artists, only Christine has a first degree in visual art. Cathy originally trained as a biologist, Antony as an environmental and geoscientist, and Perdita as an environmental manager. Christine Baeumler's collaborative project involved environmentalists at the Sac-Zim Taranaki Bog in rural Minnesota, an ecological scientist, and a team of engineering specialists. After several years of research, planning, and fundraising, they created a work designed to show that a fragile ecosystem, even when transposed to an urban environment, can, under the right conditions, both re-establish itself as green roof infrastructure and provide an aesthetically attractive microenvironment. A microenvironment located, in this case, over the main entrance to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Do try this at home if you feel like it. A project like this can happen because, in addition to being an artist, academic, and field ecologist, Christine has also developed negotiating and management skills through working for over 20 years on community projects restoring local, natural, and cultural landscapes. Something like the Tamarack Rooftop Project requires drawing on, translating between, and interweaving creative, scientific, community, and educational skills, concerns, and understandings. Cathy Fitzgerald is a rather different case, so to speak. Ireland's forestry policy addresses everything from water quality and archaeology to biodiversity and the conservation of the freshwater pearl mussel. But as policy, it's piecemeal and fails to address wider ecological relationships. Cathy's creative practice aims to contest this through visualizing best practice. The Sitka spruce plantation out of which Hollywood is emerging was planted about 1985. Cathy, a biologist in New Zealand before studying art in Ireland, began working with the plantation 7 years ago. Her open-ended project involves working in with the forest and with foresters, the local community, politicians, and policymakers. Her aim is to use Hollywood's gradual transformation into sustainable mixed-species woodland to reveal, through a wide variety of media, new understandings in contemporary, transdisciplinary, eco-art practices, that's her term, ecological science and forest policy. Sitka spruce plantations are both ecologically toxic and aesthetically unattractive. To address this requires both aesthetic improvement and managing the tensions between the economics that originally created the plantation and local desire to re-establish broadleaf native trees. After Malta, Ireland has the lowest level of forest in Europe, in Western Europe anyway, I think in Europe. The Irish Council for Forest Research and Development assessed the plantation's transformation scientifically, but Cathy aims to catalyse multiple exchanges between the wood and local people, silviculture specialists, timber users, artists, and environmental enthusiasts. These exchanges are simultaneously ecological, creative, political, and education, and are demonstrably helping to reposition forestry practice and notions of community and environmental constituency. Antony Lyons' Lovely Weather project involved meteorological scientists, a local postman and dedicated folk meteorologist, and teachers and pupils at a local school. Its focus was the role of weather in the life of the River Finn Valley in Donegal, along with the processes that enmesh the valley in both physical and metaphorical global systems. The project made these connections visible, facilitated awareness of their richness, and drew attention to the attitudes and issues they raise. It placed the weather as it occurred centre stage, interweaving scientific measurements of rainfall, humidity, temperature, pressure, wind speed and direction, with local vernacular weather lore and personal weather-related material gathered by Antony and a small team of local volunteers. The role of local peat bogs as carbon sinks became an important focus in the project, and a peat stack and related artworks in the final exhibition raised questions about the socio-political impact of weather and climate change locally. The project drew out the distinct ways in which local weather as an active force in the life of the valley is linked to the different concerns of regional, national and international constituencies. Slow observation was central here, using an existing field gate close to a local weather station as a lookout point. Antony and the volunteer observers kept personal weather diaries over a year. As a consequence, traditional notions of landscape were modified by a sense of reciprocity out of which a weather world could appear. Perdita Phillips' The Sixth Shore was an artist-in-residence project at Symbiotica A multidisciplinary science lab at the University of Western Australia. It used a multi-layered, site-specific soundtrack to challenge participants to explore different levels of time and space by determining where they walked within a specific landscape. The project applied ecosystematic thinking to a particular locale using a suite of 6 different time and space scales, beginning with the 3.5 billion year old geological space-time of a reef of microbial thombrolites living in Lake Clifton in Western Australia. The lake's aquatic ecosystem is fed by an influx of groundwater that's decreasing due to climate change, so that the surrounding landscape is now subject to various ecological issues. Changing sea levels that shape the whole coastal area only cut the lake off from the sea about 4,000 years ago. The area is central to the ancient indigenous cultural heritage of the southwest, and the site of more recent clearing and development. The lake itself is an important habitat for waders from the northern hemisphere, including Siberia, which migrate there annually, as well as for the local hooded plover. The project set out to weave its facets together by using multiple stories, by critically interrogating potential futures for Lake Clifton, with a view to arriving at the 6th and final shore of the work's title. To summarise, Owen Jones suggests that the epistemological and methodological divides that currently isolate philosophy, social science, natural science, poetry, art, politics and literature are, in the last analysis, institutional and pedagogic devices for maintaining the status quo. I think the current political, academic and economic status quo is quite simply unable to address the intermeshed issues of self, society and environment that we now face. I suggest that this situation requires us to develop new forms of praxis and, using 4 examples from my own field of concern and interest, I hope I've suggested how such forms of practice might function. Thank you.
It's going to be quite difficult following me, I must say. I have to say that ages ago, this is a warning, ages ago, Iain, after a talk I gave at UE, Iain said, well, if this was a football game, I would have held up a red card. Anyway, so yes, this talk has absolutely nothing at all to do with the Pied Piper of Hampton, which is Robert Browning, but my literally a lot of my practice is carried out on the river's brink. I live and work on an estuary in Suffolk on the River Deben, and I've lived there for 35 years. So consequently, I've seen things change quite a lot, to the extent that, if you like, what we're seeing, talking about climate change, that we have 2 changes happening on our coast. One is isostatic change, which is England rebanding after the Ice Age, and the south end going down, and the top end going up. So it means that England's sinking roughly at a rate of about 1.5 millimetres a year at this end. Also, sea level rise is roughly happening at about the rate of 1.5 millimetres a year. Add those 2 together, you've got 3 millimetres a year. I've been living where I'm living for 35 years. Multiply that by 3 millimetres, and you've got quite a good shift in the tidal range, which does have an amazing effect upon the biodiversity of the intertidal zone. That's really what I'm going to be talking about. But first of all, this is Long Island, and in 2012, it would have been February 2012, I ran a session at the Association of American Geographers conference in New York, and as a part of it, we were given an opportunities to go out on field trips. So there's one out to Long Island to look at the defence works and look at the biodiversity of the dune lands and so on. And when we got there, it was quite a storm. It was very, very stormy, and there it was very beautiful, clear day, strong wind, but as you can see, there's a big storm apple starting over there, which we don't want to get in the way of. When we were there, as probably some of you who may know Long Island, especially if any of you are surfers, know that the surfing championships take place there, which has had a big effect on the defence works on Long Island, to the extent that a lot of the groin works, which would stop the loss of dunes, were stopped by the lobby from the surfers, because it would spoil the surfing, it would make the surfing dangerous. So consequently, when I went there, I was really quite staggered at the poor quality of the sea defences. Now, coming from Suffolk, we don't have a big tidal range, not as big as down in Bristol, but on the Severn, but we do have about 4 metre tidal range. And when we went there, I looked at the boardwalk, and I looked at the sea wall, and the sea wall had whacking great big holes in it. And the holes had just had gates in them, just steel bar gates. And I said to them, do you have any trouble with flooding? And they said, oh, no, never had any trouble with flooding. It never comes up this far. I said, well, where I live, we have 4 metre sea walls. This is roughly about right, but why have you got holes in it? He said, the tide never comes up this far. Believe us, it never comes up this far. So that was in February 2012. October 2012, we had an event called Hurricane Sandy. And that's what happened. And that's what, take the slide before the last one, that's what that looked like afterwards. So, you see, what becomes very interesting here is that the intertidal zone suddenly became of huge importance internationally. It never really figured. This funny little area that I was working in for years and years and years and years suddenly became headline news, mainly because there was this issue about the fact that the foreshore was actually so badly maintained that the storm tide could go straight through massive expensive developments like on Long Island. So 1 o'clock forward a bit, or 1 o'clock back a bit here. This is our river. This is the River Devon in Suffolk, and this is all work being done on the river defence walls. Now these are just earthen walls, which are and we've gradually got a programme going to build the walls up to an optimum level to make them all equally resilient or all equally recoverable, if you like, after a flood. And this work was done in 2011. Some of you may remember in 2013, 6th of December, we had a surge tide. And this surge tide discovered all the weaknesses in any of our earth walls and punched whacking great big holes in them. That is the wall which was being mended in the previous slide. If we follow that through, the landowner, that lost about 80 acres were flooded of private farmland. The landowner eventually, when he could get down onto the land and and when the land was firm enough, could get plant down there, plugged the gap with sheet piling, and then eventually reinstalled the wall and then pulled the sheet piling out. And so that's where we are now. But what that pointed out is the fact that those walls had absolutely no intertidal zone, which acted as a buffer zone for tidal actions. So the point about managing the intertidal zone became a very big international issue, and it's being dealt with in lots of different ways. What's interesting to me is that an awful lot of big money is being thrown at it, and also quite a lot of development is happening in terms of systems which can be used. And these are two examples. This is Long Island, the result of a competition and it's called living breakwater. And the interesting thing is that it's actually to develop mussel beds offshore to act as a buffer zone in terms of onshore gales. The lower one is in San Francisco Bay, and it's called horizontal levees, which is to extend the foreshore out into shallow water, so that there is again a buffer zone of a biodiverse area, which will act as a shock absorber or an energy absorber in terms of any kind of storm action. The big issue there is that, quite typically for America, I'm afraid, is say no way can we lose our real estate. So consequently, the solution is always to work outwards to the sea, not to lose the land. So that kind of neurosis is something which we're having to deal with. We're having to deal with this notion that there has to be a conversation about give and take between natural systems and how we manage them and how they manage us. This is a tidal wall down again on our river. It's a very well maintained wall, partly because it's a wall which breached in 1953. And it's next to a large salt marsh area that I have been working with for the last 4 years. And the salt marsh area it's basically an island which has been formed by a channel which goes between the wall, the sea wall, and what's the salt marsh. That's that island there. And this is just an example, really, of the kind of work that I've been doing is working with salt marshes to see if there are ways of managing of restoring them, managing their health, and also allowing them to be, if you like, a first line of defence in any kind of stress situation, like high tidal surges and storm action. And the kind of work I've been doing is installing quite large brushwood structures which will act as filters and also to slow tidal energy, so that basically any sediment within the system will drop rather than wash out salt marsh material. That was a drawing for this structure here. Another structure at the top of that, where that map was a much more complex thing, which looks like that. It's a composition of straw bales, coir, and brushwood. And the idea is it lets the tide in, but it lets it in a controlled manner. Another project I've been doing recently is very messy. It's working with a boatyard or a marina in Suffolk, and it's to find a way of working with their annual dredging, their annual dredging campaign, where every year what they dredge is somewhere between 15,000 and 30,000 cubes of mud every year from the marina, and that mustn't go out into the tideway. So we have rather a lot of mud to manage, and in order to do that, we put in tidal barriers which will contain the mud. So that's it pumping out. That's it after it's been pumping. So it's retaining the mud, which will raise the land level higher in the tidal column, so that basically that should start recovering. So yes, this is further down. So it's actually a horrible muddy area which we've been blocking the channel system incrementally to distribute the sediment loaded water over the whole surface of what is probably about 30 hectares of land or of mud. And so where you see that there's a you can see those little bits sticking out. That's actually the very top of a tidal fence, smothered in mud after one dredging campaign. The kind of thing which we've been doing, again, I feel my role is very much to do with having a conversation with the tidal system and there being give and take, not saying, okay, we're going to control the tidal system and therefore make something happen, because we can't do that. I'm always being asked by people, especially in my area, saying, well, is it working? And I say, I don't know, maybe, but this is before we put structures in, which was just structure, in this case, to quell wave energy. This is afterwards. So that's not a big deal. It's a pioneer plant. It's samphire. A lot of you will know it very well. Salicorn. It's delicious. And it is the autumn, it takes on that red colour. But if you didn't have this fence work here, that wouldn't be there because it would be continually washed down. Thank you.